Hello, I'm Stephen Kay, and until December of 2018, I had served for 23 years as the pulpit minister and one of the elders for the Redlands Church of Christ. And following years and years of decline, we had come to realize that we were a dying church. The year before, the fall of 2017, we began as elders to try and find a way to turn our decline around and bring life back to our church and reach our community with the gospel. We were down to just 60 active members, which even at that number made us larger than 50% of the other churches of Christ in the United States. We began to pray and ask the congregation to pray that God would show us a way, that God would show us what we needed to do to reach our community. And it was amazing how God began to show himself to us in so many different ways. And indeed, the journey we went on during the following year was totally guided by God. But I want to caution you, don't pray that prayer unless you're sincerely determined to follow what he shows you need to do, because he has answers for your problems. We knew that trying harder at the same old things we had always done was not going to bring about any different results. We put together a team of members. Some of them had a very long history with the congregation, but all of them were open to the possibility of change. We talked with some consultants, and I shared with them that unfortunately, most of the churches of Christ in California had never been able to reach into the culture of their communities, that we were made up for the most part of transplants from the Midwest. The consultant said, well, why don't you talk to some successful churches in your area, ask what they're doing. So we began to do that, and one thing that we learned about that time is that there really weren't any growing a cappella churches of Christ in California. So obviously there were going to need to be some drastic changes that we needed to bring about. We found a growing, successful community church near us, and we reached out asking for some help to turn some things around. And they responded so graciously. They sent one of their pastors to us, and he led us through a SWOT exercise. We looked at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The exercise showed that we had been in a decades and decades long decline, that we needed to bring about so many different changes, even a change of culture. We'd become so inward focused. One of the things we began to realize through a book that they shared with us called Better Together is that it's impossible to change the culture of a church without the infusion of new blood, and that new blood has to have a different attitude. You can't bring in new blood from another dying church. That's not going to work. Through all of this study and all of this prayer, we began to realize that what we needed to do was to merge with a growing, active, and vibrant church, to unite with them. As we looked at the first church that we had reached out to, we realized that a merger wasn't going to work with them. The theology was just too different. And while we could give up a cappella worship, we just couldn't give up weekly communion. So God led us to Eastside Christian Church, where Gene Apple is the lead pastor. And since we understood that churches don't join churches, it's people who join people, they began to send some of their people over to worship with us. And they did a sample service for us and shared their vision of what a merger would look like and accomplish in Redlands. And we decided that we would merge with them. When we held the vote about dissolving the Redlands Church of Christ Corporation to merge and become Eastside Redlands, the vote was 70 for the merge and only 5 against. That was an amazing outcome. I want to tell you that as we began the merger process with an updated worship, many of our members' children and grandchildren began coming back, and within a few weeks, attendance had grown from 60 to 100. And in the year following, they grew to be around 300 in attendance with monthly baptisms. And so many of our members who had stayed were now involved in working harder than they ever had in so many different ministries. It has been an amazing experience to see how God answered our prayers. It was almost as if we had brought to him our few loaves and fishes, and he had just multiplied them. And I wish you all well as you struggle with being the church that God wants you to be.